My name is Aparna Basnet. I am with UNDP and I'm the Regional Advisor on Human Rights and Rule of Law. And I'm really happy to welcome you to this session. This session is on regional leadership and action, national action plans as pathways to stronger standards. We are going to be starting this morning with an interactive engagement with you through a Mentimeter. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to please put the Mentimeter up, and then we're going to, before we move on to the panel discussion. Great. So I think if you take a minute to scan the QR code, and then we can get started with, we'll have 3 questions to see sort of what the knowledge there is in the room, and also maybe set the scene a little bit for some of the discussions that we're going to be having with the really distinguished set of panelists that I have with me here today. Okay, so I think maybe we can move on to the first question. And this question is really to see, what you know currently. We had some of these issues brought up in the opening session already. But the question is, how many Asian countries have adopted national action plans on business and human rights in the past 5 years? We have different options: 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So it'd be good to see what people know already in terms of how many national action plans on business and human rights have been adopted in the past 5 years. Some think around 8, there's a lot around 5, some 12, some 1. Okay. So maybe we can move on to next slide. So this is the second question. How many ministries were involved in Indonesia's National Action Plan development process? Some people are very quick. I can see they're responding very quickly. I think we're going to be speaking today also about the importance of different stakeholders being involved in National Action Plan development process, certainly stakeholders and rights holders, but also the importance of broader ownership across different ministries in the process of developing National Action Plans. And I think it's good to look at what the experience in Indonesia as well. And the last question: roughly how many stakeholders consultations were held during Pakistan's National Action Plan development process? And we'll hear more about that as well from one of our distinguished panelists today. Okay, so I think that's the last of the questions. People are still putting in their answers. Great. So I think we can close the Menti now. So some of these questions were really to get your engagement, and I think we're going to explore some of the answers in the course of our conversation today with this panel. And it's really my privilege to be introducing this really excellent panel that we have here today. So first I will introduce Mr. Abdul Khalik Sheikh, who is the Secretary of the Ministry of Human Rights of the Government of Pakistan. Then next to me we have Dr. Punita Silvaraju, Deputy Director, Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department of the Government of Malaysia, and we'll be hearing more from her on the National Action Plan in Malaysia. Then next to me we have Ms. Chumki Datta, Program Manager for the Southern Voices. So thanks for joining us, Jumki. And then next to Jumki, we have Ms. Patricia N, who's a human rights defender and activist from Indonesia, to hear her perspectives as well. And last but not least, on my far side, we have Ms. Kuan Rutai Siripatan Kosol, Ms. Kate from the Global Compact Network of Thailand. Thanks for joining us. Before I turn to the panel, just some brief remarks. And maybe to answer the first of the questions that we shared with you on the Mentimeter. So over the last several years, countries in Asia have been at the forefront of the business and human rights agenda, and we've also heard some of that during the opening session this morning. In just the past 5 years, 8 Asian countries have adopted national action plans on business and human rights, with the first national action plan adopted in Thailand in 2019, and the most recent one in Malaysia just last month. This reflects a remarkable policy momentum in the region. Even as we see in some other regions, there is a slowing down in some cases or even diluting of commitments. So we see a real push forward in the Asia region. And we're really keen to hear some of the momentum of the reasons for the momentum behind this interest on business and human rights and national action plans. So overall, we're seeing 2 sets of developments in relation to the national action plans that I just wanted to particularly highlight. First, national action plans on business and human rights have become an important stepping stone towards mandatory human rights due diligence as well. And I think that's the key part of the conversation we're going to have today. Several Asian countries are already moving beyond NAPs to discuss legislation on mandatory human rights due diligence. Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand are exploring these options, and South Korea has also just introduced a draft bill. Second, even in countries which haven't adopted national action plans, the process through which national action plans are developed has had an impact. And we're going to hear about how in some countries this has really helped to increase awareness and push forward stronger regulatory frameworks to ensure corporate accountability and prevent and address business-related human rights risks. Ultimately, NAPs are not the end in themselves, but really to serve as a guide to increase business respect for human rights and to promote accountability for business-related human rights and environmental harms. So I think we are really keen to hear from all our speakers today, really on how we can, what lessons we can learn from the NAP development process and implementation, and how this can inform the design and rollout of mandatory human rights due diligence, bridging this gap between voluntary commitments and binding obligations. So for the first round, I'm going to ask Dr. Punita, maybe we can start with you, to share with us Malaysia's experience. So Malaysia is the latest country in Asia to adopt the National Action Plan, and already there's some discussion around mandatory human rights due diligence. Can you tell us a little bit more of what has inspired this momentum? And what do you see as some of the most important lessons from developing the National Action Plan that has shaped and accelerated the move towards mandatory human rights discussions? So over to you, Dr. Punita.
Thank you, Aparna, and good morning, everybody. Just to answer your question, Aparna, maybe I'll just start off with some of the lessons that we've learned, or maybe one particular key lesson that we've learned in the course of drafting our NAP, BHR NAP. Well, we started sometime in 2019, although the conversation to come up with a NAP started way before that in 2010. A lot of work went in 2019, a lot of conversation on the process of drafting the NAP, engagement sessions and things like that. And eventually, of course, COVID came in 2020, and that really halted everything. We had to slow down, but nevertheless, we had a lot of engagement sessions online. Thank God for that. So we moved on. Of course, in Malaysia, we also had the issue of political stability. So within that course of 2 to 3 years, we had 3 different prime ministers. So there were political instability to a certain extent, and there were priority changes, just like anywhere else. So the NAP kind of had a bit of a backseat, took a backseat, with reference to policies in Malaysia. But we moved on, and eventually, in 2022, 2023, we had our national baseline assessment, where we actually looked at the current policies, the current strategic frameworks we have, the laws in place, and what are the gaps in these documents and instruments, and how we could actually bridge the gaps through the NAP itself. Eventually, of course, we had a zero draft, and then the NAP was, as you rightfully mentioned, the NAP was launched just last month, 12th of August. And I think the most important lesson is the amount of engagement that we had. Inclusive engagement, the people that we actually met, we went down to the states, because our federal system also looks at federal, and then we have the state, and then we have local council. So we had to go down to the state levels. We had to go down even to the local councils to see what they had to say, what businesses had to say. So that was basically something that assisted us all the way, and through all those difficult times of COVID and political instability, I think this was one of the biggest lessons that we've learned. No matter what you do, whatever NAP that you're coming up with, never ever stop the engagement that you have. So that is the biggest thing. Which is a very positive thing for us, of course. Going back into when you speak, you asked me about the momentum. Why are we looking at mandatory HRDD? Of course, in Malaysia, recently, just before launching the NAP, we had some very disturbing scenarios or situations that happened. One, if I could share, is the Putra Heights gas leak incident, which caused a lot of lives. I think there was a bit of issue in a big housing estate because of a gas leak. And the other one is the Upsi bus crash, where about 20 over children died. So this actually brought us to understand that it is very, very important for businesses to take responsibility. And after those two incidents, the minister in charge of law and institutional reform even came up to the extent to say that we may enact a corporate manslaughter act in Malaysia to overcome issues like this. Maybe it's a bit too drastic, but of course, that is just the spur of the moment when you see all these things happening, and the fact that businesses sometimes do not take corporate responsibility. So this is one of the reasons why we thought probably the mandatory bit would come into play. Although, of course, in Malaysia, the entire process just started. For us, the implementation process started. We are just setting up our governance structure with a working group, with a monitoring, evaluation, training and learning multi-stakeholder committee to look into how the implementation should take place. So it is a little too early for us to say that we would move into mandatory. It is still voluntary, but we are looking at many legislation that we could look at the feasibility of having, number one, an anti-SLAPP legislation in Malaysia. Number two, probably supply chain legislation as well. So these are some of the things we are looking at, and because voluntarism may not be accepted by companies, by businesses, because they have got so many reportings to do. You've got ESG reporting, you've got sustainability reporting, and then now you come up with a BHR reporting. So it may be burdensome for companies. So these are all the things that we need to look at and we need to consider before deciding whether we want to go into mandatory due diligence. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I think you raised quite a few important points in the importance of the engagement process, but also, how it's critical to now you have that in place to also already begin to look at broader legislation to strengthen corporate accountability. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Shaikh, because Pakistan also went through extensive consultations in the process of adopting the NAP in 2021. And I just wanted to ask for your reflections on what impact you see that the process had on businesses, on government, on policy, and on communities, and what lessons from this experience could help other countries as well in the design of their NAPs and move towards mandatory human rights due diligence that is more inclusive and effective. So over to you, Mr. Shaikh.
Thank you very much for referring to this very important aspect of the issue. and I will try to give my input from the experience of Pakistan on in all three areas: businesses, government policies, and communities. So, in terms of impact, the first visible impact that we have noticed is about the awareness, because that is the beginning for the entire process of implementation. Uh, it has definitely, in terms of businesses, it has definitely raised awareness for human rights regarding due diligence, particularly in peculiar circumstances of Pakistan in the textile, leather, and agriculture sector. And at the same time, now with the introduction of National Action Plan, it has now supported global effectiveness by preparing exporters for international due diligence laws. And it also encourages overall uh, responsible practices in larger companies. Particularly what challenge we have faced is in the smaller and medium-sized enterprises, the capacity is limited, so there's uneven uptake. But if you look at the government policies, law reform, and structures, again, this is area where we have seen impact, because this is from where we started after inclusive consultations. So we have seen promotion of coherent policies across human rights ministry, commerce ministry, labor and environment ministries. And in the peculiar circumstances of Pakistan, where you have multi levels of governance, federal, provincial, and local government. So this is very important, that you have a platform and you have a roadmap where all these ministries coordinate and work together for due diligence in human rights. And this has definitely influenced regulatory reforms. And there have been a number of initiatives, uh, particularly Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan has now made it mandatory for disclosure of gender pay gap, and besides that, it has strengthened oversight responsibilities of the boards. And we have seen ECG sustain a portal by ACCP, Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan, and now even in non-banking sector, we have this mandatory gender disaggregated data on ESG portal. And again, in non-banking microfinance sector, we have women equality provisions, and equally important, there's a gender focus consumer protection framework also. So I will not get into details, but just listing out the areas where we have seen improvement and impact in terms of government's policies and working. Uh, and in establishment of implementation structures, particularly the steering committee and the interministerial committee and provincial committees. So there's a robust structure available for any further takeoff from voluntary to mandatory regime. Still, we see challenges which I would like to point out, like weak budgets and slow systemic change are the main areas where we need to make some more improvements. As far as the impact on communities is concerned, um, NAP particularly has helped us highlight protections for women, minorities, persons with disabilities, and informal workers. And in Pakistan's context, informal economy has a big share, so informal workers' protection is extremely important. And now this has reinforced access to remedy via grievance mechanisms and inspections at local level in the provinces. And likewise, civil society is using NAP for awareness and advocacy on different forums. So this is again a takeoff forum for them. But the challenge here because it's not all a rosy picture. The challenge here is that we have seen low grassroots awareness, which actually limits impact on the daily lives. So we are making strides at the strategic level, at the planning level, the structure level, but the impact on daily lives is yet to be realized, and the quantum is the issue. So overall, I would say the NAP has been effective for agenda setting and business awareness, but deeper community impact requires budgeted implementation, regular monitoring, and small and medium engagement. Lessons and guideline for other countries, as you referred to. So what we have seen, there are peculiar lessons from Pakistan, which can again be with certain changes and taken up by other governments also. We learned that the voluntary first and regulatory next, so we don't have to rush with it. The second lesson is that inclusive consultation is essential, because in our experience, as the earlier speaker also identified, this is very essential. And localization matters, so it's not one size fit for all. And for instance, in Pakistan's concept, informality, gender gaps, and labor protections are the key areas that we focus on. And phased implementation works. This is an other lesson that we have learned. And I would say what we learned is that baseline assessment is crucial, because mapping legal and policy gaps before you drafting NAP is entirely essential, because you need to have evidence-based decision making. And we must be proactively aware of the challenges in implementation. So we must be aware that without budgets, timelines, and monitoring, impact remains limited. And there should be focus on vulnerable groups, highlighting women, minorities, informal workers, and broadening the scope of BHR. How it can help other countries? So at the cost of repetition, I would say start with the national baseline, ensure multi-stakeholder engagement, adopt a phased approach, and link NAP to global trade and investments, because this helps prepare for human rights due diligence, and most importantly, institutionalize accountability through steering committees, regular reporting, and budget allocations. In terms of steering committees and structures, our experience has been very happy one. As far as the reporting and budgeting, we need to catch up in this. So in the end, I would say that we should also leverage South-South cooperation. This again comes from Pakistan experience, because we learned from Thailand, and then we passed on to Nepal, and now Nepal is actively engaging with other countries. So these are the lessons that we have learned from Pakistan's experience, which can be replicated by other countries we are in similar situations, who are in similar situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the insightful comments and Pakistan's experience. I think you touched on a lot of important things, some quite similar to what Dr. Punita was also saying about the importance of consultation and engagement, but also beyond that, looking at how do we also be quite practical about making sure there's ownership across different ministries, and that this is actually institutionalized, but also that we have the adequate budgets to make sure that the implementation moves forward, and taking on board also a localized and contextualized approach to this. So with that, I think I'll pass on now to our next speaker, who is Ms. Kate. Mr. Shaikh just mentioned that he learned from the Thailand experience, and that Thailand was one of the first countries in Asia to adopt a NAP. It's currently in its second National Action Plan. And so from a business perspective, do you think these NAPs have had a tangible impact so far? And how are companies using this experience to prepare not only for possible mandatory human rights due diligence, which is what the conversation is right now in Thailand as well, but also for meeting the requirements of export markets, right? And where regulations are already in place or maybe becoming more stringent. So it'd be great to hear from you, Kate, on your perspectives from the business side.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. And actually, having NAP as the second phase already for this is the second chapter starting in last year. I think this shows continued commitment of Thailand and stakeholders like the government and business, including civil society and all multi-stakeholder. Although the consultation is very critical for this, I think this is very important, and that agreement and disagreement have happened, but I think we learn from each other very well from the experience, the lesson learned from the NAP one. And then NAP is a kind of, although it's not legally binding, but it's something that showing from the voluntary to some more structure, preventive approach or implementative approach where we can measure against each plans. So I think this is a good kind of initiative for us to be a kind of practical performance towards the mandatory human rights due diligence. During the NAP 1 until now, we can see from our membership perspective though, we have achieved, like from the member of 140 of us, have achieved from the policy commitment level of 100%. We see 100% of membership already provide training to the employee, I mean, in own operations. But there are some challenges to extend this to the supply chain. So this is an area that inform us if we don't have any kind of plan, like national action plan, so we don't see it, right? We need to take this carry forward, against the plan. So this is a kind of the NAP giving us a learning phase for the HRDD amongst the large corporation, among the memberships, the members. So this is something that I can see and experience from NAP. And from us, private sector, we also be part of the commitment as well, like not just only, driving the NAP, the development of the NAP, but after that, we also be part of the monitoring and evaluation as well. So I think this is good way of learning among us, to learn from each other. But what we need more, how to make this NAP, HRDD become enforceable obligation. It's more than the MNE, but if something happens so badly or severely, so that need to be addressed under the enforceable obligation. So I think this is something as a kind of a learning phase, and then making us to understand what needs to be done under the HRDD, and then now we need to ensure a kind of minimum requirement under the MHRDD law, not just to be so advanced, because we have at least 90% of the business that are SME. So we need to give a balance of this as well. But at least we, as the business of all sides, of all sector, need to have at least the approach of the HRDD in place as part of business strategy, not just moral imperative. So this is something that I think having played a role in NAP development or now policy advocacy for the MHRD to teach us on this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think what you're emphasizing is that the NAP really gave you an opportunity to learn and exchange with multiple different stakeholders and build the basis to now look at how we can strengthen regulation so that human rights due diligence can be enforced more. So it's been a good opportunity to learn how to take this forward, also making sure looking at different sectors and particularly at small and medium enterprises and what that looks like. So let me go now to Indonesia and to Ms. Patricia In. So Patricia, Indonesia has an app and is currently actively discussing mandatory human rights due diligence. From your perspective, what do you see these debates look like at the community level in particular? And what lessons should governments and businesses draw to ensure that rights holders are meaningfully included in not just participating, but actually shaping these frameworks moving forward? So.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I just give this information that in 2023, Indonesian government launched a presidential decree number 60. It regulates the national strategy for business and human rights. But yeah, from our community experience, the debates on the national action plan on mandatory human rights due diligence often feel very distant. Communities, particularly women, indigenous people, rural community, plantation workers affected by large-scale palm oil concession, experience human rights violation directly for years. But we are rarely included in early and meaningful ways in these policy conversations. When it happens, it's often top-down, short-term, or overly technical, which makes it difficult for rights holders to see their realities reflected in the frameworks. This experience teaches us an important lesson. The debate on the National Action Plan and implementation of MHRDD will only be meaningful if the voices of the communities most impacted are truly heard. This is not a formality, not just a consultation on paper, but the full involvement in designing, implementing, and evaluating policies. Because for us, this matter is not only having regulation. For our community, the rural communities, it is about our lives, our land, and the future of our generation. So, yeah.
Thanks very much, and really emphasizing that we need to go beyond consultation to meaningful participation that shapes the frameworks that are being developed, right? And so it needs to go, and I think we've also heard the importance of broader stakeholder engagement throughout the NAP development process, but I think you're emphasizing it needs to go beyond that as well, right? So now I'm going to turn now to Ms. Jumki Datta. So Jumki, we've heard stories of successes where NAPs have been adopted, but there are also cases where there have been extensive processes that have taken place on developing a NAP which hasn't resulted in a national action plan being adopted. So maybe you can reflect a little bit on these processes and how that process itself can be helpful or not in terms of how it affects businesses and communities. So over to you.
So thank you, Aparna. I think there's no denying the fact that NAP sets the tone or the roadmap for BHR. But what is really exciting is that in the global south, what we see is that there are various experiments that are happening right now. While there are countries that have the NAP, they're looking at MHRDD, like many of the fellow panelists are talking about. Many of the African countries don't have a NAP, but are looking at more binding regulations. Like Malaysia is looking, for example, at a binding regulation. So I think what is happening is what the gentleman from Pakistan also mentioned is the localization and the contextualization around NAP that is taking place across global south, and which actually gives us a lot of opportunity to look at and address the unique context that we have. So if we look at India, for example, in this context, India, we started with the NAP. We had the zero draft in 2018, 2019. However, I think that remained at a voluntary level. What the government was more keen on, that we heard, was a more mandatory disclosure. And that is when the government moved into the business responsibility and sustainability reporting template, which right now, I think 1,000 plus companies are reporting on across 144 indicators, of which 66 indicators are primarily on business and human rights. And rest of the indicators have cross-cutting themes around human rights, which shows that there is a huge disclosure ecosystem that is being built around human rights, around implementing responsible business conduct in the country. What that disclosure has done, or the template has done, is basically made data accessible. Once you make data accessible, it becomes easy to engage with businesses, with regulators, with civil societies, with governments. And what has happened is also in that process, they've shifted the burden of accountability on the businesses. Now, the businesses have to disclose what they are doing on business and human rights, right? So I think that is one move that the government has been able to make, and that we have been seeing in India as well as civil society. This is not new. This process started, I think, in 2011, as soon as the UNGPs came into being. And ever since then, we have seen how the businesses have started to come into this business and human rights, like from policy disclosures to actually practical examples, practical evidence is now being provided as to how the companies are involving human rights due diligence in their practices. While we see that, and that is an important, I think, milestone, the civil society and trade unions are caught in that muddle because they were the protectors of human rights, right? Now they have to look at new roles. What is the new role of engagement? How can they engage with the government? How can the data be more useful? And that is where civil societies like us are working to create more awareness around that data, right? Having said that, I think what my fellow panelists also talked about was the supply chain, right? That has become completely, that continues to be invisible even in India. While 90% of our production happens in the supply chain, especially in the MSMEs, but they continue to be, not there. And what is happening is that, like us as civil society actors are trying to collectivize these supply chain actors, create understanding of what responsible business is, what BHR is, and how the tools like BRSR or the Business Responsibility Framework can be used to create better practices, move from policy disclosure to more performance disclosure. And what we have been able to achieve is that we've been able to expand the concept of workplace. It is no more the factories of the businesses only. By collectivizing supply chain around business and human rights, you're able to expand the workplace and the operation, and thereby look at, what the value chain is. Having said that, I think there's a lot to celebrate around it. But there is some caution because I think what NAP does is strengthens government mechanisms. That is something I think that we have not been able to do. Strengthen the existing mechanisms that exist within the Indian context that could actually create better accountability systems. But overall, I feel it's the diversity, the acknowledgement that one size fits all approach is not going to work, and the fact that the ecosystem is now ready to experiment with new models and bring in more mandatory systems to ensure that business and human rights actually thrive in that region. So yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Shumki. I think highlighting very much that we're really ready. The NAPs have been very useful in some ways. There continue to be challenges, but that also the region is really ready to lead and experiment in new ways to move towards more mandatory due diligence as well. I'm going to do one more round of questions and then hopefully open up for questions from the floor if we have sufficient time. So in the second round, I really wanted to focus on moving from on the implementation and design, right? So how do we make sure new laws and policies deliver actual meaningful outcomes for people, but remain workable for businesses and build on global lessons and while still reflecting local realities? We've heard from many of the panelists already the importance of localization and contextualizing for the different realities on the ground in different countries. So we know overall that Asia is showing strong policy momentum, and we've also heard there's been uneven implementation of the NAPs, and in some cases questions have also been raised between commitment and NAPs on paper to actual policies. But we've also heard that actually this has been a useful way in which to move the agenda forward, and that now the discussions are moving towards mandatory due diligence also is a response to some of these critiques to make obligations clearer, enforceable and less dependent on voluntary uptake. So I wanted to turn now to Dr. Punitha, maybe to you first, to speak a little bit about how Malaysia is quickly moving to adopting its NAP towards talking about mandatory due diligence. You already touched on this a little bit. What challenges do you see in ensuring that this shift delivers more than policy on paper, and that actually translates to meaningful outcomes for businesses and communities?
Thank you, Aparna. If I could just add a little bit from our panelists as well. I think for us in Malaysia, we just launched our NAP, but of course, as you mentioned, we don't want the action plan to just be a plan. So there are actionable items. We have about 135 actions that we need to take. And also what we've done is that within this 1 year, we have stated 11 immediate actions that we need to take. So we are focusing on this 1 year. What are the immediate actions that we need to take so that we can keep ourselves busy in implementation? That's the first thing. As I mentioned already earlier, we are establishing a governance structure for this. So we have a working group made out of very passionate people when it comes to the NAP and BHR. And we also have, we are establishing a multi-stakeholder monitoring, evaluation, training and learning committee that is made out of not just government agencies. We are looking at civil society, our civil society and NGO friends. We are looking at trade unions. We are looking at academicians. We are looking at other people to join us, to actually industries, businesses to actually join us and tell us, not only for us to consult with them, but also to advise us what are the things that we actually need to do in this 1 year. What is the implementation? So we already have some 11 areas that we need to look at, and amongst them, of course, is the drafting or the feasibility study of drafting some important laws that I've mentioned earlier, anti-SLAPP, supply chain. These are some of the laws, and we may consider other important amendments or other important drafting of important laws when the time arises. But besides this, I think as the other panelists mentioned, it's very important for us to have engagement at the grassroots, localizing this entire initiative. What is important for us to understand is that we are responsible to set our own rules. So localizing it is very important. Understanding what is required at the grassroots, how it assists the community overall, that is very important. The second thing, of course, for us is understanding the needs of the businesses. As I mentioned earlier, we don't want businesses to be too bogged down with reporting mechanisms. We want them to do this wholeheartedly. We want them to understand that this is a shared responsibility and accountability. They have to do it because it is not a choice for them anymore. They need to do it. So we want them to understand that. We don't want them to say that we have too many reporting mechanisms, therefore BHR is just another reporting mechanism. We don't want that. We want to actually make them understand that this is a need. You have to do it. The other thing is ESG is already out there, and in Malaysia, everyone is jumping into the ESG bandwagon. So we want to actually explain to them the difference between ESG and BHR and how they complement each other and how they can work together. This is something that we need to do very tactfully. So we need to discuss with businesses. The other important thing is to have collaborative partnership. So our partnership is not just with the government agencies, the line agencies that are involved in the NAP, but also with the CSOs, with the businesses themselves, with the tripartite, the trade unions, for example, those who look at the interests of the employees themselves. We need to have engagement and we need to collaborate with them. That's very important. And I think Jumki actually mentioned a very good point on supply chain, and this is really missing. I think this is something that we need to look at as well. So overall, I think looking at a mandatory move is, yeah, something that we can consider for Malaysia, but I think we are just exploring all these important elements first before looking at how we can move into a mandatory process.
Thank you. And I think, as you mentioned, collaborative partnership will be very important, but also that it's a shared responsibility. How do we make sure that there's ownership among different parts of the government, among civil society, but also among businesses to take forward the obligations as well. I'm going to turn then to Ms. Kate for the business perspective in terms of what is most needed to make the regulations practical, right? And I think we've already heard, how do we avoid, making it another layer of just reporting? And how can mandatory human rights due diligence be implemented in a way that avoids being a burden and instead builds this competitiveness and also the dialogue and trust with rights holders and markets? So over to you.
Yes, I think the most important thing of the development of the MHRDD in country like Thailand, I think we have some lesson learned already from the EU CSDP. So I think this is something that we need to learn on that. I think it is very important that we need to follow what work, what doesn't, or what need for Thailand, because I think, yes, one size doesn't fit all, and then in Thailand we have very different in the sense of the SME has become like 90%, and then informal work, informal economy, that kind of thing. So I think this kind of different factor need to be fit into the development of the law, and that I think I agree with colleagues here that consultative approach perhaps not enough, but we need to put forward to the participatory approach as well. So that is really something that we don't need to rush on this, I think, but we need to understand and ensure once the law is passed, then it works. So yes, of course, what we need in the law is the clear legal obligations for the business, what needs to be done, what action they need to take. For example, they identify risks, how they prevent that risk or mitigation, or how they end. Because I think the purpose of this MHRDD is to end the adverse human rights impact. So that is something that we really need to look into this, and how, because the different size of the company has some different capacity as well. Like level of capacity is something that we need to ensure before the law launch. And then I think the scope to cover, in terms of learning from the EU CSDP. So what scope that we need to go? Yes, of course, we need to go along from on operation to supply chain. So that need to be really as the heart of the law. And then, but in terms of the small, an SME size, I think the phase implementation is something that we need to think about. Also, in terms of the victim who has been their right being violated under the human rights laws, or the conventions, that kind of thing, how they can access to justice or remedy. So that need to be a kind of liabilities under that law as well. So that needs to be clear. And the complexity of the SME, as I said earlier, I think this needs to be discussed really seriously. But I think having this law, what need for the business, especially for Thailand, I think if they are doing this, all of these, what kind of incentive they should be supported as well. I'm not going to ask about the financial incentive, but other incentive along this phase. I think it's very important. The capacity building, to make sure once the law passed, they can perform well, in order to prevent any kind of liabilities. So I think this is very important from the government. I'm asking the government to think about the incentive on this. From the financial institution, I think the access to finance is very important. If they are doing this, their performance is well. So this can be part of the whatever evidence or document that's supporting their access to finance. This is something that I think very good. From the business among us, like the buyers, I think very good. I mean, this is one they have done this HRDD. What we can do in terms of responsible purchasing. I think this is something that we really need to discuss as a shared responsibility for the business and for the buyers to do together. So with all of this, I think that would make the law work and effective in the sense. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I think you're emphasizing points that everyone has made, that one size doesn't fit all, and we need to look at different types of businesses as well, but also that when the laws are being developed and you have mandatory human rights due diligence, it needs to be clear on what the legal obligations are, and there needs to be clarity across the board on that, but including on how to ensure access to remedy. And okay, so I think we're going to move quickly now to maybe Mr. Shaikh. I think you touched on this already in your previous answer, but perhaps you can elaborate a bit more also on the challenges that you faced in Pakistan in moving from the NAP on paper to actual implementation, and what has that meant in practice on the ground. So over to you.
Thank you. I would say that obviously the ultimate goal is implementation, but we cannot overlook importance of planning, because as they say that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So although it looks like people do ask that so many years have passed and there's a wonderful plan and awareness sessions, but how far the things have actually moved on ground in terms of visible improvement in condition of labor and other human rights protection and dealing with the environment hazards. I think the first thing is that you need to have clarity about your destination and about the roadmap, how to get there, and you need to have motivation and buyout by the stakeholders or partners, and finally means. So if you have everything in place, then actually you can achieve your goal. And having spent most of my career in enforcement, I can use a general analogy that any enforcement, after making of laws and putting in place enforcement mechanism, depends on three key factors. That is, those factors are strong state institutions, rule of law, and accountability. So this applies generally to every enforcement, and I can apply this to enforcement and implementation of National Action Plan as well. So far, it has helped us in taking this critical step by bringing the UN guidelines into Pakistan's policy mainstream. Having said that, I must acknowledge that the National Action Plan does not replace implementation. It actually shapes ecosystem. It legitimizes this entire process and conversation about it, and it lays down the roadmap for achieving the goals set. So, but it is job half done. And the central question is, how do we bridge the gap between commendable commitments on paper and tangible change on ground? So, since you asked for the challenges, I'll just list out some of the challenges. In our experience, one challenge was that ministries were working in silos. Particularly, there was a constitutional amendment which devolved certain functions of federal government to the provinces, and there was a gap. The federal government relinquished responsibility because it was mandated by the constitutions, and provinces took time to fill in the gap. So that was a key challenge which took time for us to overcome. The other thing is what I call enforcement over enactment. We have seen piecemeal legislation and we made strides, commendable, but implementing those laws was an uphill task. The third thing is economic priorities. The businesses, you see, at a strategic level, we have to strike right balance between ease of business and protection of human rights. So this perspective has to be bought by the businesses also. Now, mostly these small and medium enterprises, they perceive this as a Western agenda or foreign agenda being imposed on them, or when, as government functionaries, we are implementing, some of them consider this as red tape coming in their way. So this has been overcome to some extent due to through awareness and stakeholder consultation. Another challenge is the scale of the informal economy. In our country, there's a massive portion of the workforce in informal economy, which is beyond reach of most legal protection and social safety nets. So that's a constraint. And awareness and capacity. So as I already said, small and medium enterprises do not have capacity, and in some cases, even the activists and labor unions, they do not have proper awareness. Although in terms of awareness and stakeholder consultation, we have made commendable progress. Still, I think there's a lot to be done. So, having said that, there have been a lot of improvement in transitioning from commitment to real implementation. For instance, I'll list out certain steps taken by the government authorities and businesses, particularly law reform. There has been amendment to against protection against harassment for women at the workplace, and this has broadened the definitions, offering more protection now. And other one is ratification of ILO conventions, specifically the protocol on forced labor. The third one is amendments to bonded labor laws, which now introduce strict punishments. The fourth one is creation of dedicated business and human rights websites. So this creates awareness, engagement, and reporting mechanism. And there has been continuous engagement and consultations. We already talked about it. And very important, we have revised occupational health and safety laws now. There has been legislation proposals on home-based workers, bringing informal worker under formal legal protections. And finally, in certain provinces, for instance, Sindh, in 2022, there was amendment in the law which expanded the Sindh Human Rights Commission's mandate to investigate reported violations and abuses committed by businesses. And there have been a number of regulatory steps and changes by Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan in their disclosure regime and regulations and oversight, which I will not repeat because I covered in my last comment. So I'll conclude with this, that the NAP's progress is currently catalytic and not conclusive. It has excelled at legitimizing the conversation, creating a roadmap, and building foundational awareness. Now what next? How to move ahead from here? So we need political will to prioritize human rights alongside economic growth. Then we need mandatory measures where we need to explore mandatory human rights due diligence laws which do exist in certain countries. So this is how we can move beyond voluntary engagement. And most importantly, as I said, to get to your destination, you don't have to be just aware of the destination and the roadmap. you need to have resources. So resource allocation, particularly empowering enforcement agencies like labor inspectors and the judicial system, because judicial system again is a challenge, and continued collaboration, deepening the multi-stakeholder model that NAP has begun. So I will finish with this final thought. The NAP is not a failure if it even remains not fully fulfilled. But it would be a failure if we stop using it as a tool to demand better. The conversation it started must now turn into consistent action and ultimately meaningful remedy for those affected by business activities. So it is possible to move from this voluntary compliance to mandatory regime, and even in our country we have made meaningful strides, and I'm quite positive that if we follow this roadmap we can ultimately bring changes positively in people's life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for outlining the challenges, but also areas where there have been progress, and particularly for emphasizing. I mean, I liked how you put it that NAPs are catalytic, not conclusive, right? I think it's part of a journey in terms of making sure that we support the realization of the rights for the rights holders and are actually able to hold accountable businesses. But at the same time, you also emphasize the needs to also not be overburdened. Some you as well as some others have also mentioned that, but also to ensure that there is still some level of ease of doing business. So how do we manage that? So I think I'm going to turn now to Jumki, back to you for the last two comments of Jumki, and then to Patricia, and then we'll open up the floor for very few questions, and then conclude the discussion. But Jumki, I wanted to bring up with you in terms of how there are global discussions ongoing, including on the corporate sustainability and due diligence directive, and some are progressing and some are still being discussed. I wanted to ask you, because you also mentioned the Global South, is there any role models we can look at in the Global South itself? And how do we develop approaches that work for our region while upholding international human rights law and universal values? And then maybe you can bring in some of the reflections from your session yesterday as well, where in terms of what safeguards are needed to ensure mandatory human rights due diligence in Asia remains contextual. I think most panelists have raised the importance of localization and contextualization, and firmly grounded in the realities here in the region. So over to you.
So yeah, thank you, Aparna. I think just to look at CSDDD, I think there is much to celebrate. There is also much to cry over, and because a lot of things have also been diluted. But it has at least started a conversation around something mandatory. And how that will impact in the supply chain is, I think, we will all see in a couple of years. But I think there is what yesterday's conversation was. The conversation was around both fear as well as hope. The fear that will we be able to reach the last mile, because all the panelists talked about supply chain, the value chain, the informal workers. Will the CSDDD be able to reach out to that level? I think that is one fear that we're looking at, right? The hope is that it will create a culture of mandatory due diligence and pass on the burden of due diligence to the companies and the brands, right? Having said that, I think another fear is who will bear the cost. Will the cost be shifted to the supply chain countries? Will the MSMEs have to bear the cost, right? So I think there's much of skepticism around how it will roll out and what is the impact it will have in the supply chain. If I look at the Global South, I think CSDDD alone will not work, right? Because our supply chains run very deep. We have talked about home-based workers who are not even, who are not even visible. We have, with waste circularity, with all these new climate goals coming up, we have a different supply chain that is coming up of sanitation workers, which nobody considers as their own value chain, right? Where will they land up? I think there's much of discussions that need to happen. How do we integrate these people into them? Because they are the most vulnerable in the supply chain, and if you're unable to integrate these workers, we will not be able to realize a complete due diligence, right? We will only be able to limit ourselves to what we have been doing in terms of our factory gates and not move beyond that. I think one is that. The other thing is, I think also that the due diligence will set up new management systems, new monitoring systems, right? How will that be governed? I think that is a big question. Who will govern them? Whether it will be governed by the Europe, whether it will be governed by the southern government, who is going to ultimately have a say on that? I think that is one important question that we need to really ask ourselves. Another thing is around the blind spots, right? We have not really had a gender reading of CSDDD. We have not had occupational health and safety reading of CSDDD. Where does these topics really stand? We are supply chain countries. We are seeing the climate having a lot of impact on the workers. The heat stress on the workers is increasing day by day, right? Are we discussing that? Is that coming into the human rights conversation? Is CSDDD talking about it? I think that is much to be, talked about. There is a lot of progress that is happening in the global south. We have a lot of tools, we have a lot of legislation that are being worked on. For example, we had somebody talk about yesterday about the binding the binding agreement that Malaysia is thinking around with regard to due diligence, right? We talked about inspectorate systems and how that could be made more effective to ensure labor rights are protected, that occupational health and safety issues are actually brought into the forefront. I think those are some critical questions that we really need to also look at, and that I think the global south is ready at this point of time, because we have the NAPs, we have our due diligence systems, we are moving towards mandatory processes. However, all of this needs to be aligned with CSDDD. Rather, CSDDD needs to be aligned with these. Otherwise, the contextualization will not happen. It will continue to reiterate the power asymmetry that continues to exist, and will not really create a level playing field both for the supply chain countries as well as for the brand countries. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I think you're raising a lot of very important points about, really trying to understand what is the specific context for the region and how that we can be part of a dialogue of what that means also in terms of broader global legislation and regulation. But also, I think there's some similar points that I'm hearing across many different panelists. One is around, the invisible supply chains and the informal workers, but also around the capacity development, right? How do you actually do capacity development or awareness raising of small and medium enterprises or informal workers or others, and where do they fit in this, which is a big part of the supply chains in Asia. So I'm going to go for one last question to you, Patricia, and then open up the floor. What risks do you see if mandatory human rights due diligence is poorly designed, right? If, for example, it becomes a reporting exercise without real remedy, and we've already heard some other of the panelists emphasizing the importance of enforcement, and what safeguards are essential to ensure it truly protects communities and empowers rights holders. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, based on our experience, there is a significant risk if mandatory human rights due diligence becomes merely an administrative obligation. It could only turn into a mere thick report, while on the ground, farmers are still losing lands, workers are still being exploited, the community are still facing violences every day, even facing the armed forces when we make a peaceful protest. In Indonesia, in palm oil industry, in mining industry, military approach often feels like protecting the corporation more, resulting human rights violation getting worse on the ground. Therefore, I want to emphasize for crucial safeguards in my point of view and our community point of view. There should be a real redressal. There must be a remediation mechanism accessible to victims, not just reports to the government or corporations. And then second, the transparency. For example, in our case, in terms of business partnership contracts, financial flows to the land data need to be open to the community, because it's rarely happen in a palm oil industries. And then third, meaningful engagement. Farmers, indigenous people, workers, rural women, and vulnerable groups must be involved from the start, not just invited when the documents are ready. And the affected community will only come and only be a mere listeners. And fourth, protection for the human rights defenders, especially those who works in front lines. People who defend the community rights and speak out should not be criminalized or victimized. Without all of this, then the mandatory human rights due diligence risks becoming, a box-ticking exercise that fails to protect the impacted communities in particular. So we need a genuine FPIC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for bringing in the importance of FPIC and moving beyond box-ticking exercise, right? And how do we actually make sure that there is protection, redress, transparency in the process as well? So with those great reflections from the panel, I'm now going to turn to the floor. We'll take a few questions and then come back to the panel for their final reflections. So there's one here, one here. When you, just 1 minute, can we have one more from the floor? And one over there as well. Please, when you take the floor, introduce yourself and then make the question short rather than a comment. So over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Adrian from North-South Initiative, Malaysia. Question and comment to Dr. Punita. So I'm very happy that the National Action Plan in Malaysia is for business and human rights is finally launched. Many years ago, I learned that one of the indicators to measure is to see how many times communities is mentioned. So migrant workers is mentioned about 19 times, refugees 4 times, asylum seekers twice, stateless once, and I think undocumented twice. So I know with the sentiments in Malaysia, it's very hard to include them. So this is good news. Thank you for that. My question is, in terms of monitoring, evaluation, accountability and learning, how can the grassroots be included in the follow-up? Because that could make a big difference in shifting the power back from a bottoms-up approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Mahmudul Islam Khan. I'm from ILO Dhaka, Bangladesh. First of all, congratulations to all the countries who has already adopted the NAP in Asia. So I have a question directed towards colleagues from Pakistan or anyone else in the panel. So this is regarding the informality. So we know that in the NAP there is sections directed towards business, and also states they also have some particular actions to take on. So the question is, when there is a significant level of informality, like in Bangladesh, where we see there is more than 80% of employment are part of the informal economy. So whether there was any particular items that was directed to the informal economy in your NAP, and then also in part of the process of developing this NAP, whether you engaged with the informal economy, and if yes, how did you engage them? Because this is, I think, the informality is in Pakistan is quite similar to Bangladesh. So I think that could be a good learning for us in Bangladesh as well. And if anyone else, I know that this is the same for other South Asian country and also Asian country as well about the informality. So if anyone also can highlight on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the last question over there, please.
Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. I'm Prim Rajasarang over Samakun. I'm a youth advocate. And I would like to ask about, with this climate change and AI, and how can we be more the effectiveness of the NAP, and how can we evaluate partnership, innovation, and innovative approach to raise awareness of business partner or empowerment of children and youth to be the stakeholders and to be collaborative actors into implementation of NAP, and as well as the continuation on the monitoring processes in terms of to preventing human rights violations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll add one more question and then maybe ask each panel to reflect very quickly on any of the questions that came through. And maybe if we meet again in this forum in 2 years, what progress would you like to see on human rights due diligence in your country or region? So I think you can answer that or any of the questions that have come from the floor. From the floor, we've had a question for Malaysia. Maybe I can turn to you first on M&E and accountability and involvement of grassroots in the follow-up. There's a question around informality, particularly to Pakistan, and how do you engage with the informal sector in development of NAPs and implementation? And then we have a question from the floor in terms of youth engagement in national action plans, but also if there's any comments in terms of engagement on climate and AI as well, and innovation in national action plans. So.
Thank you, Mr. Adrian, for your question. I think, as I mentioned, for Malaysia, we are looking at this 1 year period, and we do not want the NAP to just remain there as a plan, as I mentioned earlier. So definitely we will engage the grassroots. So my team is working very hard to look at the group of people who will be involved in the multi-stakeholders committee. Of course, it is not, we cannot have a huge committee, definitely, but what we could look at is to have subcommittees within the committee where we could look at very targeted areas to get your feedback and consultation. So definitely we are working on that. So that will be, I think, give us another month or two, we should be able to get that on. Do you want me to also answer your question on the 2 years? Okay, all right. Okay, just to answer Aparna's question on where we see ourselves in 2 years' time, a few things actually I have. Number one is we are looking at the buy-in that we can get from businesses, how businesses can internalize the NAP BHR itself in their business practices. And of course, this taking into consideration the supply chain. I think that is really missing. So that is something we should work on with businesses. So we are working on that within that 1 year, 11 action plan. This is something we're working very hard on, and also that will definitely take into consideration capacity building and awareness. So automatically, when you have capacity building and awareness, businesses will definitely will look into how we can inculcate this into the practices itself. Besides that, number two is to have the right mix of volunteerism and mandatory. So we are looking at certain laws. We don't want to be too much of a command and control. We don't want to go on too much of a command and control approach, and make this entire process burdensome for businesses. So the right mix is very important. Thirdly is the third pillar of access to remedy, which makes indicates the difference between the BHR itself and ESG. There is access to remedy, and it's very, very important. So we are looking at coming up with a human rights tribunal for Malaysia. Of course, that would be overall human rights violation, but specifically for business-related violations, we could have a platform for access to remedy. That is the third. And of course, the fourth is to look into incentivizing businesses, something that Thailand has done, awards and things like that. Of course, over a period of time, we can also consider tax incentives. So these are things that I would foresee in the next 2 years.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to move over there for the Pakistan, maybe on that question, and as well as on where you see in 2 years. Yeah.
So, National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in Pakistan covers 8 priority areas. So, number 4 priority area is labor standards and the informal economy. So, this is one of the priority areas. Then we have 69 other action points. So, this is the entire structure of the National Action Plan. So we specifically cover, because this is, as I already pointed out, one of the crucial issues that we face as far as challenges are concerned, because sizable workforce of Pakistan's economy is engaged in informal sector. And here we share a lot with Bangladesh. And but this is area number 4, but the other 7 priority areas, most of them cover informal workers indirectly. Like number 5 is child labor, number 6 is forced or bonded labor, number 2 is anti-discrimination, equal opportunity and inclusion. Number 7 is occupational health and safety. Number 8 is access to remedy. So all these indirectly, but we have specifically covered at area number 4. Then we have other actions like encouraging documentation and inclusion in Pakistan surveys, Statistics Department of Pakistan. And there have been court judgments now also, which make it mandatory for the state authorities to register informal workers. So although this is an area that we are still making progress in, and we also look at the Bangladesh example also, because when I saw that Bangladesh improved in terms of global gender parity from 99 to 24 last year, and our ranking was not very encouraging. So I looked at, we all looked at the Bangladesh example, that what they did in terms of gender inclusion and informal sector and care economy and other workers. So I think we also learn from Bangladesh also, but I learned with this that we have specifically covered this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Kate for brief remarks at the end, and then we'll conclude the panel as we're going over time.
Yeah, I think I should take 2 issues, I think, pending. I think the youth engagement is very important, and GCNT Thailand is supporting the youth engagement, and we have specific program for the youth. The youth become, everything for us, for the future generation. They become the business, they become the political leader, and they can become the employee as well. So I think this, their voice should be heard, and yes, we kind of, this is a big gap that I think they should be included in all policy advocacy, including this MHRDD. So that's one thing. And I think the issues of climate and AI, I think it is very important. And even though this is about the environment, but it's the human rights is there too. So I think it is very important. It's a kind of issue that we need to touch upon, not just issue of just transition, regenerative and nature-based that bring to the light to community. So I think this kind of thing needs to be kind of more involving in the discussion. And the MHRDD should not be just only looking at the labor right as a labor right, but issue, as you said, the climate that affect the occupational health and safety need to be really discussed. Yeah. So I think it should be included in the due diligence management. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe for Trishelle, you next, if there are any comments on any of the questions.
I'll be very short. If all of us meet again in 2 years, I hope there will be a real change. We have a hope by attending this big forum, which I believe also attended by experienced and influential parties. We want to see regulation that aren't just looks good on paper, but that truly change the lives of smallholder farmers and workers in Indonesia and other communities across Asia Pacific. For us, the measure of success isn't the number of reports or documents being made or submits, but whether our community rights are recognized, whether we can make a decent living from our own farming, and whether our voices are valued. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then for the last word, over to Jim.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think what I want to say that we cannot look at due diligence as a static process, right? It's an ever-evolving process. Looking at it needs to definitely change and look at various themes like climate change and AI. It needs to go beyond the traditional stakeholders. Like you said, in terms of youth, we need to bring together those youth into these conversations because it's not really reached out to them. So I feel that what is important is that it needs to continuously evolve itself. Year on year, I would say, rather than look at it a 5-year, I think year on year we need to reflect on where we are reaching. Only then we'll be able to make some changes in the business ecosystem. I think in terms of what I want to see in the next 2 years, we have talked a lot about generic disclosures. We've talked a lot about generic nature of business and human rights. I think the conversations need to shift to sectoral saliencies. Only when we are able to shift the conversation to sectoral saliencies, I feel we'll be able to address the violations that currently exist. Because one sector, textile sector, is very different from the coal sector, and that's very different from the pharmaceutical sector. We need to look at that entire ecosystem of issues that exist and address it sectorally with clear roadmaps, with clear goals that could align with each other, but address and use various different strategies. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I won't try to summarize the panel. I think we're way over time already, as it is. But I'd really like to thank all the panelists for really insightful and really concrete and practical reflections as well on the way forward. And also to thank all of you for joining us for this session, and really hope to continue the discussion over the coming days as well. Thank you very much.